Oh, it was a little more exciting tonight than we expected, but welcome. You can hear me? Okay. I'm Patty Sternberg, president of the Society for Contemporary Art. The SCA is delighted to provide the support for tonight's public programming celebrating the installation John Knight, a work in situ at the Art Institute of Chicago. We are thrilled to welcome distinguished artist John Knight. This program is generously sponsored by Stephanie Skestos Gabriel and Jim Gabriel, longstanding supporters of the Art Institute and the SCA. Thank you, Stephanie and Jim. Before delving into tonight's program, I would like to announce our upcoming patron and benefactor member collection tour of Bob Munch Collection on May 9th, the Chrissa exhibition tour at Wrightwood 659 on May 16th, and the Christina Ramberg exhibition tour at the Art Institute of Chicago on May 24th. They have all been sold out. Please contact us to be placed on the waiting list. On June 2nd, the SCA will be hosting a member happy hour at the Experimental Sound Studio for Sarah Binion's exhibition and music performance in the summer garden of the studio. Registration for these programs is available through the SCA website. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, please join us for the SCA Collectors Sale, Who Do You Love? On June 6th at Freeman's Hinman. It will feature a party, silent auction, dinner, and dancing. All proceeds further the SCA's mission to provide free public programming featuring contemporary artist talks, acquire contemporary art for the Art Institute of Chicago's permanent collection, and support exhibitions and special initiatives at the museum. If you haven't already, we encourage you to become a member of the SCA to access a wide range of benefits. Your support is vital in helping us fulfill our mission, and we hope you'll consider joining the SCA family. We also offer a limited number of reduced rate memberships, which you can apply for on our website. The SCA, as a nonprofit organization, is actively seeking new supporters, whether individuals or corporate partners, to sponsor our upcoming public programs and member events. Without further delay, I would like to warmly welcome Associate Curator of Contemporary Art, Giampaolo Bianconi, and tonight's special guest artist, John Knight, to the stage. John Knight's exhibition, A Work in Situ, opens today on Bloom Family Terrace. Thank you both for sharing insights into the new project and John's practice, and thank you for being here this evening.
Supposed to sit on the left.
You think so? You think so? Before we start, I just want to say thank you again to Patty and of course to Stephanie and Jim for sponsoring us tonight, and most of all, thank you to John for accepting our invitation to work with us and also to be here tonight.
Thank you. I'm wondering whether we could turn those super bright lights down a little bit up there. I can't see.
What do you think, Josh? Do you think we can turn the lights are pretty bright on us now? Dim them maybe a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. First things first.
Yes.
Can I ask you something?
What?
Can I ask you something? Ask you a question?
Yeah. For that, if you want to.
Yeah. I've heard you use a word a lot in the past week and a bit before, talking about other people's works, the word perverse. I was wondering if you might share a little bit about what qualities a perverse artwork has to you.
Yeah, have I said that certain times this week? Perverse?
A couple times, yeah. Might be, maybe speak into the mic, yeah.
Pardon me? Is that better? Well, it's trying to be perverse. But in terms of production or
For,
practice or
talk about a work, talk about an object, you've said that's really perverse as like a very positive quality.
Well, I guess off the cuff, I would say I probably use it when I refer to something I find to be working in a certain really elegant and under the radar, or it's an interesting question to ask about the word. I find it to be a positive response to something against a social, political kind of structure of normality or something. So I use it in those terms. That's really perverse. I mean, it's getting under something, or it's like, I often also use the term weasel.
Yeah, weasel's another one you.
Yeah, and for me, it's also meant to be a generative term, in the sense that nothing ever comes yes right away in life, or rarely. And if it does come yes right away, it's probably not very interesting what's been asked or proposed. And so I think of the notion of you've always got to find a way to get to the answer, or to get to the question, or solve the problem that you want to get to. So I like this kind of popular language of weasel instead of strategize or work my way through it or something like that. It's like perverse. Yeah. So when you said that, I thought of weasel. Yeah. If that makes any sense. But if I may ask you a question, right?
Yeah, please.
I'm curious to know what you had in your mind, I would say, when you want to work with Grandpa.
Who's Grandpa?
I'm Grandpa.
Oh.
Not your Grandpa.
Right.
Generationally,
right.
Grandpa.
Well, that's also a good question. The work that John has made for us that you'll see after the talk is on the sculpture terrace that's called the Bloom Family Terrace. And it's a space that is endowed with a budget to present, for the most part, commissions of new sculptures at the Art Institute. And it's been used traditionally for that manner. It's been used as a place where people make large-scale works and they are shown, or where pre-existing large-scale works by artists are exhibited as well. It's a sculpture terrace. It's used for that reason. And I thought that maybe you would do something a little different there.
We have quite a generational divide.
Yeah, I guess so.
Sometimes it makes me kind of nervous when younger people ask me to do something, and I'm thinking, you got to do your homework or something like that first.
Yeah. Do you think I didn't do my homework, really?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No, I think you did your homework.
Oh, I did. Yeah. That's nice of you to say. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean by kind of what's this kid want?
Yeah. Yeah. What did I want? Well, I think I wanted something to be in that space. Well, first of all, when you work at a museum, there are spaces that you program, right? Spaces where like things turn over pretty quickly. And then there are spaces that you don't program so often, like the collection, it changes, but it's the collection. It's not, And then there are spaces that you program, and when you think about a space that you program, sometimes it's fun to think about someone who might approach it in a totally different way than other people who have been approaching it. I thought when I invited you that you might approach the site, I don't know why I thought this, but I thought you might approach the site in a more conceptual way. And I think you did.
Well, it's a part of the weasel process. And it's a longer practice. I ask you, aside from the humor and the camaraderie about it, because there seems to be a lot of visiting of a certain generation of artists these days, maybe more than it has been the case in 2 decades before. 80s and 90s seem to be a complete departure from what had happened in the 60s and 70s. But then it seems as though recently in the last decade. There's a lot of interest to come back around to visit that period of time, late 60s and late 70s.
I think that's true also of artists. I think there are a lot of artists of roughly, I would say, my generation who are very interested in, post-conceptual practices of the late 1960s and 1970s, and have cited those as very important for their production. Artists like Park MacArthur and Cameron Rowland and Carolyn Lazard, Gillian Leung, Sung Kyu. And I think that, the way things go, artists look a certain place and then people like me tend to follow, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I was actually thinking of it in terms of art, but I think it's following a meta trend of revisiting certain political consciousness and things. We don't need only to look outside right now.
Do you have a thought about why that is, John?
Yeah.
Do you have a thought about why that might be?
Steve?
Do you have a thought about why that might be?
From my perspective, it's never gone away. But I think there are many thoughts about how it can be. It's a shit show that has continued to accumulate. And then it's been repressed over a period of a decade or more. And now there's another generation of young people who simply refuse to repress or deny what's going on in the world today. And of course, now we see something I go way back. I go way back to the 68 and to the Vietnam era. And I personally have never seen anything as this before. This is really, I'm shocked what's going on in the world. And I think I hope most people are, And probably the sooner my generation passes away, the better the world would be, to be sure. Because we've been busy making a mess out of things for 50 years or more. But that's a long conversation we can have, but
Yeah, might be a longer talk. But thinking about artists and stuff, I feel like in the art world and the way the art market goes, it's so difficult to sustain a career as an artist for a long period of time. And one thing that I've read other people say about your work and have thought about your work is this kind of, you've talked about having this form of a career in a different way, kind of going from working site-specifically, going from invitation to invitation for the most part. And I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit about that as an element of sustainability in your practice for yourself.
Well, first, it wasn't a large body of people who decided to go that way, and I don't think it was a collective. It wasn't something that people coalesced and decided to do as a formal set of conditions. But I think because of what took place in education in the social and political milieu in the 60s and 70s, some people felt that needed to be addressed through their work in a very different structural way. The idea of the emancipation of the studio activity, the lack of a social consciousness to that from the get-go, and then this notion of production of culture becomes social only when it's received, but it's not considered at the very beginning. It has something to do with some of our educations, too. Working in an institution for a semester, get a 20-minute crit. There seem to be things about this, the quickening of things, and the professionalization of relationships that's stuck in some people's crawls. You see in education with certain people, teaching myself and others, where the opposite was applied to the students in the 70s and 80s. They're in institutions where some of the people here went to, like Cal Arts and places like that in Los Angeles. The opposite took place. Extended crits all day long or all week long, pushing that envelope to give more time to get to the basis of what a practice is really about. I always thought the idea of studio production was very perverse because it had no relationship to social practice. And the idea of creating in a vacuum with no particular place to go except through the gallery commodity system, and you're working on speculation, didn't seem to be politically sustainable. And I think that some of us, for those reasons, and we came together in a strange way, our work coming together, not necessarily we as people, decided in some way to find another process of activity. So first, you leave the studio. In that way, I think you also establish a different relationship to the object. No longer were the decisions sculpture, painting, printmaking. It didn't make any sense whatsoever to be working with the conventions of historical conventions. I always thought that working on certain historically mediumistic conventions like painting, excuse me for those out there who are avid painters, but was more or less being a custodian of history. And I didn't necessarily have that interest, nor did I have the desire to be a custodian in that way. In fact, I had no idea what kind of medium I really needed to use. I started out as a passionate architecture student, which remains my number one passion to this day, but was through a certain brief educational process, I was very despondent by the way that it was being presented, and to some degree backed into the art world, thinking that I really had no other real interests that I saw. It seemed to be the closest thing to what I had considered my number one passion, architecture. So I found myself backing into something that I really didn't know very much about. And it's maybe because of that and the lack of a certain set of conventional educational standards that I never really thought so much about a studio to begin with. It didn't make any sense to me. And so I think I had an advantage in a way of not having to get out of something in order to get into something else. I really never was in it to begin with. Maybe it's more of my relationship to the way architecture practices or other kinds of practices where, and this comes into play too, where I needed or still need to wait to be invited, which is something that art historians like Benjamin Buchloh and others boggled their mind. To this day, Benjamin's never been able to wrap himself around the way that an artist would give up the emancipated position of freedom in order to wait to be invited.
You have sometimes made pieces where you've invited yourself.
Well, I've made. It's funny you say it that way. I will put it another way if I think I understand. I have proposed to situations whether I was invited or not. Working along these lines, one has to, I think, to be a bit more of a weaseler than being deluded about being in the studio and thinking, oh, well, I know once I get this done, there will be those people out there waiting to do something with them, right? So you have to be a little more, I don't know if it's aggressive, because it's a different kind of activity, you know.
I was also thinking about the journals pieces you made that you mailed to people, kind of a different model of working in a way, and how that blurs or kind of plays with the notion of public and private that I think you've done throughout your career. But the journals piece, this idea that you are sending someone something unsolicited that is, you know, a magazine subscription. I don't know if maybe everybody knows the piece.
Well, I can describe it.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
There was a period of time in this early to late 70s that I did a lot of this kind of work. It happened to correspond with other people working with medium that wasn't conventional to art practice. Magazines, texts. We know, people probably know it through the moniker of conceptual art. Art and Project, the group in London, nothing but describing something that could be, and etc. I think that that's part of the way I leaned into those things. But more honestly speaking, it was because I wasn't getting the kind of invitations, opportunities, and things that I would have liked to have been getting at those times. And so I had to find another way to get to produce, continue to produce. So probably the most infamous example of that is the journal series. And the journal series was, it's still, I considered open-ended, although I haven't participated in it at all for a number of years now. It was a matter of sending unsolicited 6-month or year-long subscriptions of popular magazines to people who I knew, who I met, usually people in the architecture world, the art world, or in the museum world, with no knowledge of the fact that they would be receiving this. So I would get to know someone, and if I thought I would suss them out, it was a bit of like a sociological project or socio-psychological project where I decided that I would say, Dan Graham, what's missing in Dan Graham's life is a little bit more outdoor activity. So I sent him, a sporting magazine, like, or somebody else. I would send popular mechanics to somebody like Chaim Steinbeck. So he likes to work in wood and make things. So I thought, well, maybe he seems to be leaning toward the idea of woodworking. So I sent him popular woodworking or something like that. And I got very few responses. But the only way that the receiver would know that early on, it became a kind of an iconic situation that I wasn't able to get under the radar on it after a while. The word got around, but was that on the label it would say the person's name / John Knight, the receiver and the producer. And there's been a lot written about that work through the guise, I think, of conceptual art thinking. But periodically somebody would respond to me, like Lawrence Weiner responded. Of course, Lawrence would respond. I sent him popular apartment life. And in apartment life, there's always these recipes for those who are on the go, young professionals, and this and that, and they don't have time to. So there's always recipes in it. So I got a response from him saying Alice, who was his partner, is cooking all of these cheese recipes. He's never eaten so much cheese in all his life, and they're just constantly eating one recipe after the other. So, but it would be someone like Lawrence who would respond because he worked in a certain kind of way. That's probably the more infamous one. But there were others that, and it did allow me and others to find a way to produce without the limitations of the system, which we know works on a certain kind of merit or connection or class set of situations like that. Yeah, that's true. I didn't know exactly where you were going with that, but yeah.
But there's another way that you, I think, spoke about these pieces to me through the kind of humbleness of their materials. And you do have, I think, a little bit, and there's some element of that on the piece on the terrace, a kind of, I think you have a personal connection and a little bit of a work connection to arte povera and the use of a certain kind of use of materials. And there's a way of seeing that in the magazine pieces too, turning these everyday things into
I'm a big fan of arte povera, and I knew, I was very fortunate to know any number of them very well, some of them very well. And they seemed to kind of take me in. And I think there was maybe something that they read in my work They used to call me what they call me, I'll remember now, I can't remember, but it's a very sweet compliment to the West Coast art de pauvre artists, but there was something, I'll remember what it was, but it is true that I had a great identification, or I have a great identification with a certain kind of use of materials and not an impoverishment, but I would call it more a populist. I would say the difference between myself and a lot of that work was, a lot of our work remained very sculptural, very formal, and very historically identifiable or rooted. In my case, I would pretend to say that I'm more of a populist, a Midwesterner, a person who likes slang, American slang, or I once gave Benjamin Buchloh, when he first moved to the States, a dictionary of American slang, which he always said, I love this book, I read it a lot and look at the words. That's a slightly, I think, different way of thinking about it. It's more, to me, it's more attendant to class consciousness. And it's probably very biologically connected as well. I come from a working class, middle class background. And when I entered into the art world, it was as though I knew nothing. I had no uncles and aunts, mothers or cousins that were doctors or dentists or anything else. So it was, I had to figure out how to, and I struggle with it, I still do, figure out how to maneuver my way socio-politically through the language structures that operate in a certain set of class activities, which the art world is embedded in, and other cultural activities are embedded in. So, and then I began to understand that this is maybe could be a deeper set of inquiries that I could work with and deal with and develop work out of, from a kind of nervous naivete and uneasiness to really a set of conversations that could take place.
It sounds a little bit like you're describing how you approach a site. Is that accurate, maybe? What do you mean? A site, like when you came to the museum and you saw the site for the exhibition here, I felt that you approached it in a particular way, not just materially, but as a kind of network of the class relations that the site kind of contains.
I mean, I think it's something that I realized that I'm not going to get away from. So I'm also find a way to use it, utilize it, right? The way one approaches a site. First, I guess we could back up a little bit and say how one realized that they needed to have that relationship to have to approach a site, So working in situ, it's connected to leaving the studio. It's also connected to the idea of conflating the relationship between production, the site of production, and the site of reception, which is not conventionally thought of. There's a site of production conventionally, and there's a massive gap between a site of reception, in a way. And I will say that this is very different than the way the art world, when they woke up to the idea that there was something else going on. Let's call it some kind of an alternative. The art world being anybody from the educational structure where still to this day you can go into an art school and every student will be assigned a room, a studio. And it's interesting and fascinating too when you go, excuse me for being circuitous, but this is kind of the way I'm wired. Because I've been off and on taught for years. And when you would first meet a student in their studio, they would immediately have their work all over the wall and they want to jump right into you talking about their work. And if you approach it from a slightly different way, for example, how do you like your studio? It would inevitably be something like a deer in the headlights. They look at you and literally, what do you mean? Well, is it too big, too small? Should it be whiter, grayer? I don't know. Is the lighting right for you? What do you? Trying to eke out a position with the person when you first start to work with them from degree 0. Let's back up here a little bit. But of course, they've been put into a stubbornly conventional situation where everybody needs this room. So let's take that now forward. When you're out and you're in your supposed practice, right? That practice of working in situ was reinterpreted through language by institutions as site specificity. Site specificity is an enormously and very different situation from my point of view. It's this idea of a studio artist deciding that they would kind of like to lean in a bit to work in situ because maybe it's a more fashionable or hipper or alternative or radical or avant-garde or whatsoever. Or maybe it just gives more advantage to getting work done. And it's so there's one foot still in the studio and one foot's outside. So when they go to the site, now they have to start traveling, which created this travel craze about artists. Now they were always traveling. Even if they went back and they did their work in the studio, they had to travel, right? So they're traveling. They get to the site. And it seems like there's a form of something between a pseudo-archaeologist and then later when they leave and they make something to a pseudo-political agent. They find a door handle or a niche or a piece of molding. And they take that back to the studio. If I'm starting a little sarcastic about this, I am. But and then they make something, something rather very conventional. That has folded into the idea, or there's an interchange between that and working in situ. Working in situ, this is all my ideas, right? Working in situ is the idea of going to some place where you've been invited. And when you get to that place, you have a certain set of activities that you go through, and each person's activities is probably differently. For me, it seemed to evolve into having a very inclusive, and in some cases, a very much long-term relationship with those people who were there. And it wasn't to search the psychological or psychiatric aspects of the space or the place or anything like that, but engage with it, bringing it away certain interests that you carry through your practice over and over again. That happens with all practice. I think, at least let's say all legitimate practice. And then working on a set of ideas that then get fabricated into some material result. And then the most important part at that point is it's at the moment of reception. So when somebody asks me these questions about the work upstairs, I say, I think you should ask the work. My job is done. Now there's work and reception. And I mean that in the most inclusive way. So that now we can really, the receiver has work to do, in those kinds of ways, right? It sounds like a hard guy or a tough father or something, but I don't mean it like that. I mean, it brings all of us together in a certain very different kind of way. And it bypasses in many cases, those traditional steps between studio, gallery, sale, market. That still does happen. But for me, the primary moment in the work is the exhibition. And then there may be souvenirs that take place after pieces and parts of the work you made. It is not true that conceptual artists hate money or they're against selling a work. That's some kind of romanticized. Only people with money would say that. Oh, they're against money. Or someone's poor would say that. No, we all need to make a living. But separate that from the conditions of reception and or transfer. So something can transfer if there are things, residual things left. But it's not the same as the primary site of reception. And I think that's a very different set of can of worms, in a way, if that makes any sense, or where I'm going.
Yeah. And you talking about your populism or inclusiveness, I feel like one thing you've done on the piece here that you've done in other recent and also older works is create a work that functions on the level of a sign in a very straightforward way. Sign as a sign, but also functions as an artwork and can kind of move back and forth between those things. Your project for the 2012 Whitney Biennial with the scupper, that was both an artwork and a functional scupper. The work here that kind of, where to you does that kind of sign confusion that you like to engage with come from?
Yeah, it is something that has developed in my work over the last couple of decades, or maybe even much further back, without me having as clear understanding of it. When I produce work, it seems like I'm always simultaneously thinking about the sign value of art, as well as the sustainable value of something with its practicality beyond that. It always somewhat leads to me to produce, and quite a lot clearly these days, something that can operate both as a sign and a set of very practical conditions. For example, you were referring to the Whitney Biennial in 2012. For the Whitney Biennial in 2012, everybody knows the Breuer building, I'm sure, and it's considered to be a iconic example of brutalist architecture. Well, I feel that it's not a brutalist piece of architecture at all, because it's clad in very expensive skin of stone. All the hardware is bronze. It's in fact, it's where the term architectural bronze got its name, I think, through work like Breuer's. And so this is also a bit of a cat and mouse game that I do with myself to kind of gear up to come to some notion of what to make, how to make something, how to put something. So I decided that there's one place in the Breuer building that is truly brutalist, and it's the bridge from the building to the sidewalk. For whatever reason, that was never clad in anything. It's a poured concrete object. And on that bridge, there's a rain gutter, which was also not bronzed. And it was kind of rusty and funky and nothing like Breuer would want. This guy's a slick guy, So I saw that in it, and there was a very formally designed poured concrete catch basin down in the sculpture court. It's all there, but there's no connection. So I propose that what we need to do here is we need to spruce up this situation a little more, and we need to finish the job that was left unfinished. So I propose making a bronze sleeve that would slip over the rusty spout, and make a bronze rain chain that would go down into the catch basin, and put a few lovely little river rocks down there and call it a day. But I also know that it functions as a rain chain and a scupper. And I work like this often. Upstairs is basically this same game, in a way, with a few twists in it, right? I like to have things stay, even if they don't want them to, in a manner of speaking. And this is kind of a way also of saying, because let me back up a second. Along with working in situ, those artists also ask for an artist fee, and that the institution produce the work. So this is very different than the traditions of the street art practice, And it's also a sleight of hand bit of Marxism. We work, we get paid. You work, you get paid. You don't pay me, I don't do work for you. There was an institutional situation. I won't mention it because I love the people who were doing the show. But after all these years, and after all these years of knowing how certain people work, and they invited me to this exhibition, so along the way of the conversation, I said, I'll be asking for a fee. And I said, well, JK, it's like, there are a lot of artists in this show, and we can't give everybody a fee. So, I said, well, I'm not speaking for everybody. I'm just speaking for myself. I would ask you for a fee. Well, I don't know. It kind of went rolling on this way for about 15 minutes or so. Finally, I said, okay, look, fine. I won't take a fee. If you two curators, from this moment on, stop taking your salary until the end of the exhibition. Perfect, fine. Well, that lasted about 30 seconds, right? And then it was, well, okay, fine. We'll work it out. We'll get a fee. But it's to this day, people still have a hard time, institutions still have a hard time wrapping themselves around the idea that all artists will work on speculation. And so that's another wrinkle in this whole thing, right? So getting back to what we were talking about. So here's the work. It's in the show. Every work has a label, tells you where it is. So it's on the label. When the show's over, they ask me, what do you want us to do with the rain chain and the scupper? Well, we could talk about the idea that it might stay here, right? And working like this, I could probably cut you a pretty good deal because you've already given me a fee, you've paid for the work, and it's here. Why don't you just keep it? And by the way, it's a functional rain chain and a scupper. So, and if you want to store the work, you take the label off the wall. If you want to pull the work out and install it as works, rotate through the collections, all you have to do is put the label back on the wall, and now the work is an exhibition. It seems to me like a good deal, all the way around. In one way or the other, these works all seem to unfold like this. What one will see in work of people who work this way is there is no identification or no loyalty to a particular set of mediums or materials. It can be a rain chain and a scupper. I have no love affair with rain chains and chains and scuppers. It can be what's upstairs. It depends on the set of conditions that I think need to be discussed. And I don't know how people know that beforehand, but we know that a little anecdote about how Edward Said would say, there's an irony or even a paradox in the position when someone has the privilege for people to recognize their work and the style of their work. In that, at the same time, you want to continue to move your work. And so there's this really beautiful and interesting paradox in that, and I'm quoting Edward Said, to move your work, to continue your not improving but developing in his way the text, or in my way the works, but at the same time knowing that stylistically they remain Edward Saidism or something like that. And it's something that he recognized very late in his life. And it was something that stuck with me, really stuck with me. It's true. It's a beautiful paradox.
That makes me want to ask you a question about how you've used your signature or logo over time. There is the piece upstairs is signed in a way. And you've made works using your signature since at least the 1980s. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how that came to be.
Well, I would say the relationships to instigating the idea of actualizing one's signature does have a history. Duchamp and other people. For me, the signature, logo typography, and those things have a deeper set of interest and importance to me. Part of those subjects that I find I'm most engaged with are design, how design functions in, let's say, in a propagandistic way, advertising, all the machinations of that have been very embedded in my interest, my political relationships, how to produce. So it wouldn't be out of character at a certain point, I think, for myself to start thinking, well, the one way to really engage in that would be the deprecation of putting myself right into the center, the belly of the beast, so to speak, which I think is where people need to be if they want to work on the beast. You can't, dance around the daisies. You have to go to the center of the problem and work within it, I think. So theoretically, politically, and literally. And so I think probably the first time I did that was a Documenta 7, where I made a set of ligatures, JK ligatures, which now I've used many times. And on them, I applied travel posters, which had to do with the idea, dragging in the idea of what the Documenta was, this great international fair of activities. Wasn't, of course, at that time international at all, but there was a pretense. And what travel posters and that kind of ad design actually and how they operate. So I folded them over these ligatures, where the rectangle gets broken into the thing. And I put them on the landings of the 8 landings of the staircases of the Frederiksberg Museum, which were the utility staircases, which are never really used by the public when they go to view the art. So they're in this kind of abject area. But as you pass by, and each is a different poster on the same ligature. And this is my thinking about, as you would pass by them, you would see one ad for one bucolic place or another, Thailand and this one and that one and, over. And from that point on, I decided that, or not decided, but I started to use it in a more direct way as a signature and then as a logo, as this is an example of. I have been, that tag stuck with me, the JK tag. A very close friend of mine and colleague started to call me JK, which after a while became a firestorm. People would walk up to me who I never have met and call me, hey, JK. So now I'm stuck with this, thing. But I'm fascinated by it because we're going back 35 years now. Now it's UK, JK, JZ. The logo typographical shit show has taken a level of activity that no one would have ever thought of outside of when it was first used in cosmetics and and things like that. So. And I guess it's a loose cannon that it's out of control now or something like that. But it's good. I just.
But it's a Helvetica font. Is it Helvetica?
Yeah, it's a Helvetica font because, from my perspective, way back when, and I've always been fascinated and interested in graphic design anyway, and politically deeply engaged in design as a machination of power and control, not literally the formalities of graphic design, but the institution of design. So I chose Helvetica, which is the mother lode, I think, of corporate design, the font of control. So yes, that's why I went there. The international font. There's even a Helvetica in Japanese characters. Yeah, Casey, what's it, do you remember what it's called? Katakana. Yeah, katakana, which is a very reductive, minimalized version of a sans serif, and it was used for international shipping. So it would be easily recognizable as, in the same kind of way that Helvetica would be used. It still is used. Yeah.
There's something else I want to ask you about, and it relates to the piece upstairs, and it's about scale. The piece upstairs is one that is enlarged, and we have a work in the collection of the Art Institute, a slide piece of yours called 1 inch to a foot. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your interest in and preoccupation with scale.
With scale?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I would say that it scales everything in life, I think. And it's one of the most misunderstood situations one can think of. It's abused ruthlessly by architects and other people making spatial temporal constructs. I'll back into it like this. And I came to understand my interest in scale through architecture and other things. The biggest mistake about scale is people who think it's about big and small. The beauty of scale is those who understand the proportional relationships of it to the contextualization of things. Most architects, like Frank Gehry, have no idea about scale. Klaus Oldenburg has a brilliant idea about scale, and you realize in that, and when one asks you, what does that mean? You say, there's something that you read between the object and its relationship to the other that is adjusted, and it's very important to the body and to perception. Yeah. And the way one can use it, I think there's a certain kind of modesty to the use of scale, unlike big and small. How to really describe it other than a kind of an ephemeral way is I think it's difficult. I think like upstairs, I think I was very surprised by we work on a certain scale and how that scale actually moves from one scale to another as you move from one place to another in relationship to it. And when we go upstairs, if you see the work, maybe that you will experience what I'm talking about with the work. But I think it's a very subtle and very sophisticated kind of thing. I don't know where and how it comes to me. The early work you speak about, like 1 inch to a foot in the collection, is my way of literally getting to the notion of how sculpture operates in time and space. Because I never really had an interest to figurate objects, materials, as much as to locate relationships between one thing and another. And what the work that's in the collection here is an overhead projection, and it's overhead projection for a couple of reasons, because it's ancient, to start with. And if you know what an overhead projection is, it's really an educational tool. Way back when you put something on a plate, it's reflected up and out to the wall. And I used it for this particular project to discuss the idea of the literal close relationship, supposedly, of situations. It's a plate that says 1 inch to a foot. And it's a negative with the letters are clear glass. So the light of the projector projects up and it projects out. And the way that the work operates, and it can only operate correctly in one way, is when you move it away from the wall until the text on the wall is 1 foot. So it's just rather absurd project that is self-contained but is literal. And in so doing, it solved this problem. It can't be any other way, which is ridiculous and I think completely silly. But it also, for me, it was a way of working through sculptural problems when I was young, out of them somehow into something else. There are other projects that are similar to it, and I think it was a way of I think when one begins, the first thing they need to kill their parents. It's truly a psychological set of
figuratively.
Huh?
Figuratively,
yeah. Well, it's probably also exercise in other ways as well, but yeah, figuratively. So, or one thinks should be exercise sometimes. But so you have this generation in front of you or ahead of you. And you look at it and you think about it, and anybody who says that they don't, they're not being very truthful. So you look at it, in my case it was minimalism, primary structures. And I started thinking, well, they're really not absolute and literal, like Carl Andre. It's really not literally reading the site, like Lever. So this was my way of kind of investigative journalism into what I'm looking at and what I could do. So I thought, well, let me work that through. So I made a line, but they were made out of carpenter's levels. So this, I thought, now this is really reading the site. And of course the joke would be, would one get down on their hands and knees and see if the bubble is level or something like that? Absurdities, like why would one project something that's inch to a foot? It's a kind of an absurdity, right? But it was a way of also working through and understanding things. And it helped me understand certain things about minimalism. It's an extremely Baroque project, very decorative, very related to the body and dance, and never really discussed very much like that, And so the mannerism of it I found more interesting than the proclamations made by the artists at the time. Not all of the artists, There was dancers with sculptors, Bob, people who really were working on it in that kind of a more mannered and complex way. But so it's a way, I think, of working out of and into another place. I didn't stay in that lane very long of sculpture, but having very little to no education, formal education in this, I had to kind of work my way through some of this stuff, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah. I want to take questions from the audience, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the other work in our collection, which is a work called Museotypes, that was first shown in your exhibition at the Renaissance Society, and then acquired by the Art Institute. And there's an interesting relationship, I think, between that work and the work upstairs in a way, because they both are engaging with museum architecture as a kind of subject.
The inviter is sitting in this audience. It was done in the Renaissance Society in 1983. And I knew the person who had done the architecture, a wonderful architect by the name of John Vinci, who had done very simple shifts to a very elegant space at the university. And I had the architectural background, and he and I had hundreds of hours of arguing about if Mies is Baroque or if Mies is not, and these kind of things, everybody else. And so it just seemed like a way to approach this problem was to go straight to the museum as an object, the museum as architecture. So and the museum as a commodity, and the collection in a museum as a precious item, and where something like this might go if it went to a museum. So I proposed and we produced a series of 60 bone china dinner plates. Really beautiful, actually. Gold rims. And right in the center was the footprint of as many international museums. So the shape, whatever it might be, in cobalt blue, royal family china. And we made a beautiful linear, I'm speaking modestly now, linear installation of them, including 2 or 3 vitrines to the side. And there were a couple outliners in there. Like we had Klaus's Mouse Museum floor plan in it, and a few projects like that. And so and there was a cross-reference to the idea of commemorative plates. These companies where you could sign up and you could buy and you could get a commemorative plate. And on the same side, the preciousness of the notion of the work of art and the interchange between them. And I can't really say too much more about work sometimes than that. Maybe you could speak to it a little bit when we have some cross conversation. But do you have any? I mean, I guess one could say that it was surprising, I would say, to say the least, that certain people coming to see a show of an artist like myself, who they know to work in certain conceptual ways, would be so forwardly decorative in that way, and so literal in that form. But for me, it's operating in a similar way as upstairs.
Yeah, and also something that is unauthorized in a way, a kind of unauthorized
Yes,
piece
that's
of
right, exactly. And that was in '83, and in 2011, I revisited that project, actually, at the Green Naphtali Gallery in New York, where I proposed that work. And this is another thing I've done. I have been fascinated with titles or words. So museotypes, autotypes, things like that. Bienvenido, and that kind of language, and apply them to titles, so to speak. And those texts oftentimes, more often than not, are in part of the installation of these exhibitions. A large sign, museotypes, like a banner. Upstairs, there's a sign, etc. For the Green Naphtali exhibition, I revisited that work by going back to those museums and others to see what additions and expansions they had done to the sites of these museums in that period of time, and made a set of plates that only had the additions and expansions and withdrew the central footprint. And the result was this kind of crazy futurist blobs and surrealist lines going across the plate off the edge of all these expansions and additions, making, in a way, on the same kind of precious gold, exactly the same format of plates. This one, very obviously, speaking to where money goes, to expansions, productions of museum buildings, and what that means and who is it for in relation to the money that goes to acquisitions and exhibitions and other things. So.
Yeah, thanks. I wonder if we might take some questions from the audience now. It's I don't know if we have a microphone going around, but I think you can also just speak up. Yeah.
Would we have a microphone we can pass around?
I think there's one coming. Yeah. Wait, no, there's one coming. I think there's one coming right up there. Yeah. I think it's right here in the front. Yeah.
Hey. So at the beginning of the talk, you had mentioned, Giampaolo, you had mentioned Ghislaine Lung as a kind of intellectual descendant of John's, and it reminded me of her recent show at the Wren, which featured a lot of components of sculptures that were taken from their original in situ exhibition, and that reminded me of John's work and pieces like the carpet that was made to the dimensions of the exhibition space in New Mexico. And I guess my question here is, what is the future of the bench, seeing as the terrace will be reprogrammed? Will that go on display in the gallery, and how does that change the work? Or
I mean, that's also a question for John. I mean, when I first invited you here, I invited you to show a pre-existing piece, and you said no.
Which isn't so uncommon, that people would come to, and I'm sure it's the same with others. They would come to an interest to do something with an artist because of what they've seen. And in my case, it's not uncommon that they want to do something that's been done, that they may have seen or they like. And that's what happened in this case.
So it would be up to you how that thing could exist in the future.
So I routinely say no. Because the most important reason is I want to continue to make work. And the only way I can continue to make work is to make new work, in a matter of speaking. And so we started from there. I think more than wanting to have the opportunity to make new work is also the work that one might have in mind, as you did, was a very site-specific work for an exhibition in 1984 in Rome. So in a manner of speaking, it also doesn't make sense. To me, anyway. It can be done. I have done that. But it depends on the situation. You know, it's an open-ended thing. I'm not like fascistic about it, you know. No, just because. But I think it's a richer experience for everybody, possibly to do something together that's new. And it's always interesting to me when people will say, "Well, I know, but I really would like to have that." And I think that's strange, because if I were on the other side of the coin, I would be, "Oh, you want to make something for me?" You know, like really here. Wow, that's exciting. You know, or something like that. Instead of, "Oh, I'll take that piece over there." You know, it's not. I wasn't surprised by it. But it's also kind of charming.
What is?
Well, someone would approach somebody and say, you know, would you be interested in maybe doing this piece? I really like it, or something like that. You know, it's kind of like, oh, you know what I mean?
He pitied me, is what he's saying.
No, it's
pitiful.
You know, it thinks, oh, people do like that piece, or something like that.
Well, yeah.
Or they do remember that, right? You know. But it's more, and I mean this in a very sincere and generative way, because I think it's important. It's more fun to engage in from a kind of square one position, although we know it's not square one. You know, I'm bringing along my baggage, and you're bringing along your baggage, and you know, and we're having to take care of the baggage of the institution, and we shouldn't have to, but we do. You know, and that's a joke, but you know. To do something that's more inclusive and, you know, from the ground up. It's a pleasure, actually, you know. Like, I always consider it, with my grand, lovely wife, we always say, another baby. Because it's when you work like this oftentimes, too, you make the work, it will be the same here. You see it, there's an opening, you get to spend some time with it, you go away, you never see it again. It's like an orphan. And you go, wait a minute, you know, like a lost child, right? So, and then you really have to do more work, because you have to, you know, it's like a vicious cycle, but it is a strange kind of psychological thing. I did a work in September in Berlin, I probably will never, I didn't even see the opening. And it's a bit of a strange thing, you know, but.
I wonder if there's another question here. Oh, yeah, there's one over there.
And I think there's a really wonderful element of humor to the work, and I was wondering if you could talk maybe more about slapstick with your practice, because slapstick is kind of like a comedy of scale in some ways, and how that humor kind of melds in with your political commitments as well. No, sorry. I wonder if you could talk maybe more about how comedy and your political commitments dovetail in the practice, and specifically maybe slapstick in some ways, because slapstick's relationship to scale.
I would err on the side of humor, and I think that I don't think through slapstick at all. To say I have nothing against it, but I leave it to the great comedians of the 20s and 30s in a way. But humor, to be sure, and try to make a recipe of that together with certain irony and about things. It's interesting you ask, because I think there's more humor in my work than many people seem to not think. I'm sometimes surprised that there's a kind of overriding seriousness to it, or that conceptual hammer, that takes place, like it's a conceptual piece, rigor. But I think things need to be taken. You enter through these kinds of what would we call them, humor and things to be real about something, and to be, there's a modesty in that, I think, where maybe we can come together more amenably, and then have more of a conversation about things, the world, the way it could be, or should be, or can be, or things like that. The deadpan, flat-footed seriousness to me is not very serious at all. It's not very sincere. If at all, I'm touching to
I think we maybe have time for one more question, if there's a last. But maybe,
Thank you for a wonderful talk. I was wondering if you could tell us about the image on the screen.
Well, I could tell you certain things about it that is. Should we reveal the content?
I think you can reveal. You can reveal.
Yeah. Well, I've always had a fascination with the way architects scribble. It's kind of the architect who wants to be an artist, and when they get a chance to scribble, like freehand draw, they do this kind of thing, and they like that, and it's meant to mean inclusive or open space or space like this. And in this case of the new wing, it's no different. So we discovered that there are these drawings by the architect that, the hardline drawings up here, but then below them there are these sketches, and they just make me giggle in a way, So when we were thinking about, I've used this logo now a number of times for exhibitions. I'll probably maybe not do it again, or it's like maybe I will. People say to me, "Well, you always do that," and I said, "Not always. I'm not born to something, wedded to it." But I have done this several times recently, the logo, and then it's always, what's the content? What's the interior? The interior is something that I've worked with on all the graphic design I've done. Always there's image inside of the text. So this idea of text controlling image getting broken up by text, and the notion of the kind of beauty of that kind of design work, where it's something in between letters. It's a double meaning, the graphic design mumbo jumbo. But so this happens to be one of piano's sketches of the bridge and the bridge and the roof and thing like that. So we thought, well, that's good. That's really artsy and spunky and like abstract, but not, And so I thought we could just put it down, stamp it down, put it down for history, like a, so that's what it is. It's like a freehand sketch, so to speak. Very controlled, by the way, freehand sketch. And we keep it very controlled. We keep it inside the logo. If that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
And it's supposed to be funny. And it's supposed to have, like a...
I think maybe before we end, I just kind of humorously, before we end, is there anything you want to say about Renzo Piano before we go upstairs and look at the piece?
Not a thing, except just if you have anything to ask the work,
Yeah.
feel free to ask the work.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, John. Thanks everyone for coming.